Hello and welcome to Why Design, the podcast where we explore the stories behind the founders and senior leaders shaping the world of physical product development. I'm Chris Whyte, your host and founder of Kodu, a recruitment company dedicated exclusively to physical product development. Over the past decade, I've had the privilege of interviewing remarkable people in this space, and their incredible stories inspired me to create this podcast. In each episode, we dive into the journeys, insights, and lessons from founders and design leaders driving innovation in people and planet-friendly hardware. So let's get started. Today, I'm joined by Nick Chubb, Design Director at IDC, a leading product development consultancy specializing in medical, consumer, and industrial products. Over the past decade, Nick has built an impressive career in design, working with renowned brands like Mamas and Papas, Baxter, GW Pharmaceutical, Alessi Surgical, Gecko Biomedical, in the consumer space, BT, Logic, Red Bull, Samsung, Britvic, and many, many more. He's been recognised with multiple awards and worked on everything from baby strollers to cutting-edge surgical devices. In this episode, we're going to dive into Nick's unique journey from his early days as a close-up magician, that's right, I said close-up magician, through to leading design projects that take products all the way from concept through to production. Along the way, Nick shares his thoughts on the differences between the UK and US design cultures, why he believes talent and hard work outweigh academic credentials, and he gives some actionable advice for designers at every career stage. Whether you're a graduate looking to break into the industry or a seasoned professional planning your next move, there's a ton of value in Nick's episode. So let's get into it. So Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, cheers, Chris.
So I'm going to do my best to set the scene and give our listeners and viewers a taste of what's in store. So you studied product design at Sheffield Hallam University, and since then you've built over a decade of experience in design consultancy. Before that, though, you had some stints in-house, most notably with Lifemark and Mamas and Papas. And since 2015, you've firmly been in the consultancy space, starting with IDC as an industrial designer, then moving to Therefore, and now you've come full circle, you're back at IDC as design director. We're going to dive into your career journey, your thoughts on the overemphasis on master's degrees in the US, and why you believe talent and hard work matter more. Plus, I'm looking forward to hearing your insights on supporting designers at different career stages, whether they're graduates, pivoting professionals, or relocating talent. And of course, we're going to get into the magician stuff as well. But just leaves me to say, again, welcome to the podcast. And Nick, why design? Where did it all start for you?
Yeah, I think it pulls a lot of things together, and I think that would be most people's answers, right? But the graphic design was the first thing. I think when you're younger, you don't necessarily know that a product designer is a thing, but a graphic designer is just a job that you're aware of, I think, before product design. And so I used to spend so long drawing like the PlayStation logo and the N64 logo. Now, the PlayStation logo, I challenge anyone, that is a tricky logo to draw if you are 8 years old. The fact that like the P is on one plane, the S is on another, the P isn't square on. And so when I was at primary school, like people just used to be drawing all those kind of logos. But mine it came quite easily to work out those geometries and took a bit of pride in it, to be honest. And the Quicksilver logo, I was remember drawing the Quicksilver logo for some reason, not even into surfing, but Quicksilver for some reason. And so there'd always been this graphic design and sort of, at primary school, a classic task might be create a poster for what you know about rocks or whatever it is. And I always leaned towards those sorts of activities. So then when I went to high school in year 7, I was lucky enough that my school taught product design in year 7. So having done product design year 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then A-level, year 12, 13, and then at university, I think I was quite fortunate that I was in a school that, the workshops we've got in every place here at IDC and other places I've worked, they're a bit more kitted out, but they're not a million miles away from what that workshop looked like at high school in terms of milling machines and laser cutters and lathes and pillar drills. I was quite fortunate. I think the school that I went to just had product design with some really passionate teachers. I think that the passion from teachers, I think, goes a long way and can rub off on you. But I always remember a geography teacher, and I think there was a stat at the time that was something like geography was the most chosen subject when people are in year 9, when you have to choose what you're going to do at GCSE in terms of ones that you didn't have to do. And in his mind, it was because, if you're not passionate about something within geography, I remember him saying you must have something wrong with you, because geography has so many facets to it. And I just remember thinking, I feel that way about product design, in that there's a psychology element, there's a manufacturing element, technology, designing for people, and form and beauty and craft and art, and just pulling so many things together. So yeah, that's how I feel about product design, really.
Oh, fantastic. So it's a very natural kind of organic choice for you then. Were there any competing choices when it came to choosing your A levels and then your degree? Was there anything else that was competing for your attention then?
Not a chance. The only competition was like when I was about 10, I remember thinking I'm going to be a graphic designer. And then as soon as I got exposed to product design, it just became, oh, this is it. This is the thing. And then the eye just never came off that from about the age of 11.
Awesome. So talk us through the early years then. So you've done university, you've gone to Sheffield Hallam and came out with a first, didn't you? What was life like when you kind of stepped out into the real world? Did you already have a role kind of lined up, or talk us through the first role?
I'd done a few internships and placements and stuff. I worked for a consultancy that did kitchenware and cookware products for brands like Sabatier and Bisbell, brands like that. And it was, this job came up of junior product designer at Mamas and Papas. And I quite liked that for that product, I come back to how many sort of different facets, and does it have a reasonably complex web of inputs as part of that development project. So working on a baby stroller, a pushchair, there's quite a lot going on there from a usability view, from a form point of view. It's a brand that's trying to be a premium brand. Well, it is a premium brand, as well as working with some quite complex engineering challenges. So yeah, it pulled together quite a lot of what I was looking for.
They've got a great setup there as well, haven't they? I remember visiting Mamas and Papas years ago, and it was when I was fairly early on in my career in design recruitment, and I think it was the first time I'd seen an automated stair test for whatever. It was like a test rig that automated kind of this pushchair being dragged down a staircase, and it's like, as a consumer, I guess you're naive to all the work that goes into getting a product into the real world, into the hands of consumers. But they're telling me stories of giving prototypes to obviously the Mamas and Papas of the team, and going out testing them, and they would go running at lunchtime with them and just put them through their paces. And
it's quite interesting, Mamas and Papas, because they don't just design a product to meet the standards very often, and it's something I respected them for. They would just question. So you've got to meet certain standards and the regulations to get a product to market, but they would actually just question that themselves and say, okay, we appreciate that's the standard that we need to pass, but do we think that that's what it should be? And then they would just invent their own tests and challenges for the product to go through the paces that went beyond the standards. So then it was one person's job who just basically had a huge hall to himself. A bit of a sort of, what's his name? Doc Brown in The Future. A bit of a mad dude who just sort of created his own tests, put the products through the paces. It was a great job.
I think, I know of a handful of businesses that, are leaders in their individual spaces, that there always seems to be that one guy or kind of personality in the business. It's like, well, we're not just accepting the standard. We're not just going to pass. We're going to go above and beyond, and we're going to create the new standard. And you see all the kit that they have in the test labs and the stuff that they're putting the products through. And it's no wonder, that they come out on top. Because that space is so competitive. No matter what you're selling, you can't just accept mediocrity, can you?
Yeah, but it was a good first. I suppose that was my first full-time job, and then moving to LifeMark they were growing a brand called Little Life, which was a nursery brand. So the Mamas and Papas side of things kind of helped with that. But really, I was it was the outdoor stuff that was attractive to me. So they've got two outdoor brands, Life Systems and Life Venture. And I'm big into my sort of hiking and camping and stuff. So that was just excited to be designing products in that space.
Awesome. They were, looking back, they were relatively short stints, if the dates are correct on here. So just shy of a year at Mamas and Papas, 18 months or so at LifeMark before you then went into IDC, and it was a much longer stint there. We mentioned in the intro and obviously on a prequel, and it's one of the reasons why you're on my radar as well, Nick. You do a lot with the graduate design community, helping kind of build portfolios. So you must see this kind of as well. On reflection, is that fairly standard? Kind of the first couple of roles are relatively short, you're kind of finding your way, or what would you put that short kind of stint down to?
Yeah, I think what's interesting, people, it's quite old school to think like that and go, oh, yeah. I remember people saying to me, you shouldn't be anywhere for less than 3 years at the start of your career. And I've always just felt that life is short. So to my mind, whether it was me then or me hiring someone now, I don't really mind how short a stint is if there's a very clear, you might feel it, or it might seem logical as well, but if it's the next role that they moved to was taking them one step closer to the work they wanted to be doing, I don't mind that. Personally, I don't look at that negative at all. So if I find outdoor products more appealing than strictly baby products, then I'm going to do that. And I wouldn't stay somewhere for longer than you need to, just out of some historic bullshit idea that you need to be somewhere for 3 years. I just think life's short. And so the other bit of that is, what was it? I think it was just under 2 years before moving to IDC. Well, I had a taste of consultancy for a year on a placement. And then a couple of months working for that cookware agency up north, and wanted to be working in consultancy. So that move was to then move to consultancy. So for me, if there's a logical path that's just closer to what the person wants to be doing, I don't really see that as a negative thing.
No, it's an interesting view, isn't it? Because, quite often I see that when you see those shorter stints, and there is a story there. Like, say, you're very driven on to where you're going, and there are stepping stones. But from a business point of view, and I get the pushback from an employer, it's like, do they want to take a risk on someone and become a stepping stone? But until that person's in there and it happens, you don't know, because from the outside it could look like a stepping stone, but in reality turn into a kind of a long-term thing where they actually love it. It's a great place to work, but you put your hiring hat on now, because looking back, how do you deal with that? Because you've got that sympathy to where someone's going, but you've also got one eye on, okay, I need to be building a team that's able to deliver on projects. How do you balance those conflicting parts of
I think that track record would have to be really long. Let's say a 15-year career with 12 jobs. Okay, now we can look at it and say very high chance. If they've done it twice and they're under the age of 25, I wouldn't even see it it wouldn't even be a thought in my mind.
That's good. It's I'm totally with you. It's having 2 short stints isn't a track record, is it? It's life.
Yeah, that.
Cool. Well, let's talk about IDC then. So, you've proactively chosen to go back into consultancy, and like I say, you've achieved that. You were with IDC for just shy of 4 years in the first stint, and then you've been back there nearly 6 years now, I think, by the looks of it.
So I think 9.5 years. I think I've straightened out if there was any reputation of jumping on.
So, how is that now? Obviously, you had the taste of it as an intern, but that transition then back from kind of in-house to consultancy, I'm guessing it was a happy move.
Yeah, I think just the main difference is time. And a lot of people will say consultancy is faster pace. And that probably is a fair generalization, I would say, day to day. And obviously I can only speak for my experience, but then when you speak to so many people, you get a feel of what a fair generalization would be. And it's not to say that when you work in-house, the time pressures are really on and really serious. But I just think it can be just a very different sort of timescale. So, for instance, in consultancy, especially this one, it's fair for me to set a task and know what I've asked you to do there should take about 8 hours of work, let's say. And so if you're nowhere near the output, having booked 20 hours to it, it's that level of sort of granular nature of can you perform on sort of in a matter of hours, not weeks. And my experience of in-house is that everything was working back normally from a trade show. So if I work back from a trade show, there needs to be some photography and some marketing done. And if you work back from that, there needs to be a prototype. And if I work back from that, we need to start making that prototype. And if I work back from that, there needs to be a sort of freeze on the final design. And so those timescales were felt more in weeks than they were what is your output in a matter of hours. That's my experience of the difference. So it's not to say there aren't, huge time pressures in both, but the granular nature of it at consultancy is probably more prominent. That's my experience.
That's really interesting. And I guess you're subject to your clients if they're going through that timeline. You're kind of an extension of that, but you're going into the granular detail. Tell us about IDC then in your role there, and kind of what makes you special. What makes you special enough to have done 2 stints there now? So I guess for those of the people that are listening or watching that have never come across IDC,
So IDC are a product development consultancy that about 60 to 70% would be medical devices, surgical equipment, and healthcare projects. And then the other 40% made up of consumer products and quite specialist industrial equipment or sort of commercial equipment. And then some transport products in there as well. And so, you've got consumer, industrial, and then medical. And the nature of the team is quite technical, and also with a focus on going all the way through to production. So we're not a concept house. So over 91%, we did a study over sort of a 5-year period of our work, and over 91% was associated with projects that had gone all the way into production. Now, I know for a fact there are some consultancies where that number is as low as about 15%. Now, it's not to say they're not good at what they do. They could be incredible at what they do. It just means they're not experienced of going all the way through to production. I just have a different specialism. So that's where kind of IDC is, which means if you work at IDC, you get products to market. You work on, real world solutions, real users, real businesses, and you're seeing this stuff all the way through, which has a certain appeal to it. And it also means that you are getting into that nitty gritty as an industrial designer. So it doesn't mean that I'm necessarily doing all of that engineering work. So we've got industrial designers, mechanical engineers, software and hardware electronics, and then project managers and model makers. But it can be a different experience being an industrial designer who's experienced going all the way through to production and the types of conversations and challenges that you're having, as opposed to one who constantly lives in a conceptual world. And so that is very appealing. And it's not a huge number of consultancies in this country who provide that.
No, and especially in the London area. I mean, it's there's only a handful that are able to take products all the way through. Lots of, like you say, front-end industrial design houses, and more so kind of user studies and insights. There's a lot of those
especially
around.
When you apply that medical filter as well.
Yeah.
That narrows it down. And then of those, to have mechanical engineering, software and hardware electronics engineering in-house with a pretty substantial model making facility, all of those things kind of whittle it down to a smaller number of companies that have that attracts a certain type of work that's very enjoyable to work on, I suppose, is my point.
Well, yeah, I mean, having all of that in-house as opposed to having to have a disjointed kind of design supply team. I mean, a lot of companies might have two of the three areas, but then they're missing the electronics. They have to sub that out or get a contractor in, and it's just you can make it work, but it's not as neat as having it all under one roof. So I think you've got the China side of things as well, haven't you? You've got the international
So we got
side of things.
An office in Shanghai. So I used to spend a lot of time in China when I worked at Life Venture and Life Systems, and then when I came to IDC for the first sort of 3 or 4 years, I was sort of going out to the Shanghai office quite regularly and doing, say, like 3 or 4 week stints of work in the Shanghai office, and then other research projects and stuff out there. So yeah, we've got the Shanghai studio as well. So it's not manufacturing; it's a design studio in its own right.
Yeah, brilliant. So in terms of the makeup of the team, then, and because it's more of a technical focus, does that mean that the ID side is relatively small as a proportion of the headcount there?
Yeah, and I think that would be the case in an in-house team as well. Really,
Yeah,
if you are developing complex electromechanical products, for every mechanical engineer, you do need less ID guys who are, I suppose, setting that vision, defining the user experience, doing that visual brand language and form development and problem solving from a sort of value proposition and feature set and requirements point of view. But then after a certain point, it can be quite here and there contact.
yeah,
So because it's a shorter level of contact, but it spreads across more projects. So there could be a lead engineer on one project quite a significant portion of time. The vast majority of my involvement on that project might have been heavy at the beginning and then just kind of a frequent lighter touch throughout. And every now and then there'll be a more intensive piece of work for something that goes broad again within it. So there's less industrial designers.
But then you've absolutely got that variety there, haven't you? With a bigger mechanical team, I'm guessing they're going to have specialisms. They're going to have they're the med tech team. They get first refusal on the medical devices. They're the consumer guys. But you as the ID, do you not?
I'm aware other consultancies split it out. We don't split it out. We see it as a positive thing that in terms of the exposure to all different types of technologies and markets and users and projects. So we don't actually split it out by sector.
Fantastic. Well, that was going to be one of my questions in terms of how do you kind of balance that when you're kind of one day you're working on a medical device, the next you're on a consumer brand, maybe the next you're working on an industrial product. You've got the various different regulations, but also the the trends and all that stuff that goes in. Do you find that difficult to switch the hats over, or is that fairly natural now?
It's fairly natural now, but I appreciate there can be the switching of gears can be challenging at the beginning, but normally there's a budget and time in the project to do the work that you need to do anyway. So if it's about understanding their business, there might be a sort of internal stakeholder analysis. There might be interviews and observations with users and research into the technologies that could be used in that space. And so, there's normally the time and budget is there to do the job that you need to do anyway. You're not diving into these tasks without having been informed enough to do the job that you need to do.
Yeah, awesome. And so you're now design director. You've been doing that for a few years. You've been in a position of kind of responsibility for kind of 3.5 years or so now, but relatively small team. So I imagine you're still very hands-on, still get stuck in designing.
Yeah, definitely. And that is I was talking to someone about this recently, actually, where my view is if you're a design director, there is that level of hands-on nature, it changes over time. And so I don't think the right level of being on hands-on and doing actual design work in terms of remaining a practitioner, the right level for me as a design director isn't 0%. And I wouldn't be able to do all of my responsibilities and do my job if that number was 100%. So that number, it's not a fixed state. 1 week that number could be lower, and a month later that number could be a lot higher. And it also can depend on who I'm working with. So if I'm working with someone who joined a little more recently on a project, I might want to be a bit more hands-on. And I think also I jump on a lot of calls with a lot of designers at different stages in their career and done mentoring for a long time now. And I know people are just screaming out to, who people work with is a big part of where people move in their careers. Very often people do move for people. And I just know that junior and middleweight designers, they want to see what does good look like done by someone more senior. And it can be seen as a negative thing if they never get to see that. They're just kind of, if you've got a really hands-off manager, it's my belief that that's not what people want. So yeah, that number in terms of how much I'm hands-on changes. It's not a fixed state, but it's definitely not 0 and it's definitely not 100.
It's an interesting take, and I definitely see that. I mean, it's, from my own perspective, obviously not design, but I want to surround myself with super talented people. I go to a lot of networking events and training things, and I just want to be around kind of really interesting and talented people and soak all that up. And throughout my career, I've always looked up to whoever's ahead of me or kind of more senior, and just wanted to absorb what do they do really well and how can I do that and do better myself. And from a design point of view, it must be as well going through your career, absorbing that kind of talent and absorbing kind of that influence from above, then being given the trust and the confidence from those above to do it yourself. I don't know if that's a conscious thing that you recognise, but imagine that must happen as well.
Yeah, and on the people front, I originally moved to IDC for a person, and it was Mark Tanner, who was the design director at IDC at the time. He'd done 20 years at IDEO, and I found that very appealing. So that was who I learned from when I first moved to IDC. And sadly, he passed away. But yeah, I got to spend a lot of time with him and a few trips to China and worked with him. And so he remained hands-on to a certain level. Now, I'm aware that there are titles and positions within in-house companies where what I'm saying doesn't resonate as much because they're thinking, right, but it's more about budgeting and project planning and the roadmap and resourcing and all the rest of it. And so they might have a design manager who is more hands-on than another role who's higher than that, who's might be coordinating across different projects for the entire function of product development in a business. But I suppose my point is that I think there should be a decent level of seniority and experience who is hands-on, because if there isn't, I think it's a risk that people move on because they want to be around sort of a high level of execution.
Yeah, I think in those in-house roles, you can get to a point where you're not picking up the pencil anymore, but you're pointing the pencil and kind of asking the questions as to why, kind of interrogating the design and using your experience that way. But yeah,
in terms of
absolutely, yeah. Well, that's it. And I think one of the key things that people tell me when they've gone from a big corporate structure, they've been like VP of design, and then the next role they've joined and they love it because they're small again and they can still make those strategic decisions, but they're back on the tools. And I think that's a painful point in everyone's career when it comes to design. When you get, especially in a bigger organization, you get to that point where you've got to leave the tools behind if you want to progress up the ladder. Or do you just stay? Or join a small bit? There's that kind of crossroads, isn't there? But
well, I think the crossroads though is there's a bit of a fork in the road in terms of seniority. Could be and I've just seen this in multiple businesses. I'm not saying it's true for every business, but seniority could be managing projects. And there's more, I would say there are more of those roles to be a product development manager or a project manager within product development. Probably there's much more of those roles than there are. You were a great designer, you then became, say, like a design lead, and then there was an opportunity for a position that was not to manage projects necessarily, although there could be a bit of that, but to then remain responsible for the quality of design, not necessarily project management. And there's a lot less of those roles in the UK where you are responsible for the quality of output of design and you manage other designers. And in addition to that, there might be project managers who don't necessarily manage a team of people, but they could actually, from a progression of pay point of view, could be very similar to the person who is an engineering manager or a design manager or head of design who's managing people. And some people don't want to manage people. They prefer managing the budgets and the numbers and the delivery of the projects. And not all businesses will offer that fork in the road. Because it's funny in design, you're normally, for those rare, responsible for the quality of design output of a design director or design manager that isn't necessarily managing projects. Those roles are rare in this country, and people stay in those roles for a very long time. If me and you had to write down 20 design consultancies in this country, I bet the design directors have been the same for 10 to 20 years, if not 35 years. So, yeah, in some regards, you can't assume that because you're good enough, you're going to get into those positions. There's a lot of luck of positions opening up, I think, with regards to those types of roles.
Massively, and it's one of the key drivers for people being open to opportunities. Quite often I'm speaking to people at that level that they're happy enough, but they're frustrated because they can see that there's no way kind of up where they are. So they've either got to leave or wait for someone to move on, or an opening to occur, and that's unlikely to happen anytime soon. Yeah, interesting. So that kind of segues nicely into career development, and I know that's a passion of yours, Nick. So you work with all manner of people, from graduate level through to career pivoters, and through your portfolio improvement program. I think you kind of offer coaching in that respect. What are some of the more common challenges you see with the people that you're kind of coaching, and how do you help people overcome them?
Yeah, so where it started was I had a blog, I had an Instagram channel, I had LinkedIn, and I had thoughts about portfolios, because I'd gone on a bit of a journey where there was a lady who was the principal industrial designer at Fuse Project, Amina Horozic, her name is, and she wrote a book called Breaking In Product Design. And she interviewed 100 design directors and asked them all the same questions of what do you look for in a design portfolio? What's a design portfolio that's caught your attention in the last 6 months? And I reached out to her and was lucky enough to convince her to jump on a call with me, go through my portfolio, because I just thought, hang on, if she's spoken to 100 design directors about this, that is someone worth speaking to. And then I just went through the book, and I think I must have written to the vast majority of people in that book, and there's 100 design directors in there. But it took a very, very long time being a bit crafty with your emails and your messages and your DMs and trying to get hold of people's attention. But as I kind of built up these thoughts, I had the blog, I had the Instagram, and then I was just getting bombarded to jump on calls to look at people's portfolios and getting emails. And it got to the point where I wouldn't have had a life if I'd have responded to, had all these calls. So naturally, I just thought, look, I know this is valuable to these people because there's a bit of a gap where the universities haven't done a good enough job. And then they go, right, you've graduated. And then who's really around to support you enough to do that portfolio well. Because the universities aren't doing it well enough. And that's, in an ideal world, I wouldn't do this mentoring.
Well, no.
The universities would just do it. So there's a feeling from nearly every graduate I ever speak to that the universities aren't doing it to a certain level. But then also what's in place industry-wide, other than just a handful of individuals who kind of do it. And just for the sheer volume of what I was getting, I just created a paid service. So that was why that's done. So it's like I still give up my time to give talks and go to universities and give guest lectures on it. I still publish content that I think is genuinely helpful. But for anyone who wants that kind of one-to-one, then there is this mentoring. But it kind of evolved because after the portfolio thing, it was like, well, actually, once you've done that well, you need a bit of guidance with an interview. Because what I found a lot of people were doing is they were just rocking up to the interview with the exact same portfolio, not realising this is a different context and you need a different folio for that process. So it just kind of took off. And some of them have been really interesting, right? So it's like, it could be someone with 15 years experience who's moving to a new country and, because their wife landed a job in another country. And so they're just like, look, I've had to leave my job. I'm moving to this other country. I need to land a job. Help me. So that can be one example of a challenge. I think one of the most fulfilling ones I ever had was a guy who went to university in the UK, did a degree in product design, and he was in a band. And so he never actually went into product design. He did his band for a bit and then ended up going into the music industry and was actually the manager of a production studio in London and Brighton. And he did that for about 17 years.
Wow.
And I got a call from this guy who, really nice guy as well. And he said, I want to be a product designer. Because he studied it and he loved it, but he never actually did it. And he was willing to go on a huge pay cut to make this possible. And he had a wife and 2 kids as well. But that was quite an interesting one of, well, reasonably, what's the best job we could get this guy with a great portfolio? And sure enough, and he's a product designer now. So within sort of 6 to 12 months later, it was a bit of a journey of doing some, while he still had that job, just doing some projects to add to a portfolio. And then, landed a job and now he's in it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, there's some quite interesting people that you come across. I've had other people in finance who are just like, my job is so boring, and they somehow have discovered the world of industrial design and fell in love with it, and then want to be a designer. I've also had mechanical engineers who get a taste of industrial design in a full-time job at the capacity of a mechanical engineer, and they've decided they want to transition more to being an industrial designer. Had that a few times as well.
That's interesting. Do you find that coming from the mechanical, kind of the maths and physics side of things, do you see that influenced in their industrial design, or does it limit them because they know what can be made? Sometimes you need to be free, don't you?
I think it's just having an awareness that there's different types of designers in different types of companies. And so as long as they're aware of what they're most likely to get a job in as an industrial designer, having done 4 years as a mechanical engineer, there's probably just a certain type of designer and certain type of role and company that would hire them. But it doesn't mean that you can't slowly, you don't have to go 0 to 100 in one move.
Yeah.
But just to know that, well, if we could get you an industrial design job, it might not be your absolute dream job. And then when you're in that role, you're building up the experience, and then there might be 1 or 2 moves after that. But it's a gradual process.
Yeah, you're playing career chess, kind of a few moves ahead, aren't you?
Yeah.
I'm interrupting this episode to share some exciting things happening around Why Design. At the core of this podcast are the incredible design journeys my guests have been on and where they're heading. And these journeys stem from the relationships they build, the communities they're part of, and the amazing achievements that come from collaboration. So beyond the podcast, we're hosting regular online huddles and quarterly meetups in the UK, with plans underway for an annual gathering in the US. We're also running hands-on workshops, both in person at Makerspaces and online, to connect and inspire people in physical product development. So if you'd like to join us or stay in the loop about upcoming events, sign up at teamkodu.com/events or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to the episode. So, how interesting. So, in terms of the common things that you might see then, or kind of things that people trip over more often than not on their portfolios, are there some common trends there?
Yeah, and this isn't sort of a design insight, but there is something that I think most people fall into, which is it's really easy to sit and mess around with your CV. It's nice and easy. Play around with a new format, little layout, change a few words, create some little icons. And it's a much bigger task. There's a great book called Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy. And I don't know if you've read all the Stephen Pressfield, sort of Do the Work and Turning Pro, The War of Art. Those are all Stephen Pressfield books that are worth checking out. But just the portfolio, people approach it like the CV, where they're just moving the same stuff around. And the reality is, the biggest improvements to your portfolio are going to come from, just put that down and go and do something real. So could you go and re-interview users? I know you designed it 4 years ago, but could we just go and re-interview a whole load of users of that product? Could we do the work to maybe even redesign it and improve upon it? And also, you're a better designer now than you were then, and your visualization skills are 100 times better than they were then. And could you actually build a new prototype? And so take some much better imagery. And so it becomes a much larger job. But that's where the more significant improvements to the folio will come. So the biggest thing I see is that people are just trying to create these like 0.1% improvements from just moving shit around. Whereas really the bigger stuff comes from a much chunkier piece of work that people just don't want to do.
And it's such a big part of your life that it can influence just that extra few hours, which might seem like a burden, but actually could change your life.
And if you're unemployed, it's much more than a couple of hours that you've got spare to work on this, bearing in mind it's probably the most significant, in my opinion, the most significant thing standing between unemployment and employment.
Yeah, massively.
And it kind of at a junior level, sorry.
Yeah. It also, we've had all the layoffs from Dyson last year, and that there's always those events where unfortunately people are flooded into the market, and it's even worse out in the States. But one of the biggest barriers that people put up when it comes to the portfolio is, I was under NDA, or I can't do that. And then you still see stuff, even with people with like 10 years experience, you still see them kind of with their university projects kind of front and center of their portfolio. I'm thinking there's nothing necessarily wrong with the ideas, but like you just said, it's the execution they could offer now is much more advanced and attractive as a proposition to an employer than stuff they did at university when they were just figuring it out.
The other thing is, everyone's in the same boat. This confidentiality thing applies to everyone. So almost everyone's in the same boat. So I've always thought in the first 2 to 3 years, there is an unbelievable opportunity for people to go and do a meaty rework of a project, because when you're in your first 2 to 3 years, everyone else is just saying, I've got nothing to show because I'm under NDA. But if you put in that work to redo a big piece of work, you can be fortunate enough that you have worked on something that went to production really quickly and it's in your portfolio, and it had a 30 grand photo shoot in South Africa and it looks amazing in your portfolio, job done. But the vast majority of people in the first 2 to 3 years, that's not the case. And so they're all in the same boat. So if there's a small minority who do go, there's an opportunity here that if you put in the work to do a meaningful, either a rework of a project or a new self-directed project, that one project with a great execution can actually make you stand out quite significantly in those first 2 to 3 years. Obviously, as time goes on, then more people have just got more stuff in their portfolios. But I've always thought there's an opportunity there in that first sort of 1 to 3 years.
Yeah, massively. And it's, it's a personal project, but it's influenced by real world experiences that you've picked up over the last couple of years, so it's all very valid. And if you display it in the right way, one of the things I see on portfolios, which is a common mistake, is that just showing the renders or showing the end product and not the stuff that got you there, like the research, the sketching, the prototyping. That's the stuff correct me if I'm wrong, that I think people are interested in. That's the stuff that you can probably refine a lot better 2 years into industry than you would kind of straight from graduating. So
I think what you'd said about what are some of the pitfalls or stumbling blocks, I think a big one is people aren't aware that it's perfectly valid to rework a project from 4 years ago. So I think they've just got this kind of limiting belief that, well, that was a project at uni and it was a 6-week project. And they'll say things like, oh, it was only a conceptual project. I'd be like, what on earth has university got to do with anything? If I'm reviewing your portfolio, I don't really care. You've got something there that was actually a nice idea. There's no reason whatsoever why you couldn't work that into something that's a bit more thorough and a bit deeper. And I think most people just think that once they've done a project, it's kind of locked away as a moment in time and is not there to rework. Whereas I'm sat here as a hiring manager thinking, I just want to see some good work. Whether you reworked it or not, I really don't care.
That's really interesting. Yeah, super valuable. So let's move on to the US. Obviously, we wanted to talk about the master's program over there and why you think it's a mistake. But if we talk around your experience with the US and what do you see is like the biggest differences really between kind of the design cultures in the US and the UK, if there are any that are obvious?
Yeah, I suppose we'll come back to it, but mistake is a bit strong. But so with the mentor, because I started the mentoring in 2016. So these calls have just been happening pretty much all the time for about 9 years now. And it's a pretty even split between Europe and America.
Okay.
In terms of who those calls are with. And so I feel quite uniquely placed as an understanding of the thoughts and what goes on in terms of US industrial design, and then as well as UK, because most people have just either lived one and have only spoken or sort of lived and talked to people in one world and not the other. But one thing I think there is just a cultural difference in that in the UK, if you do a master's degree, I think it's basically that it'll help you get a job. But I don't think the average person in the UK thinks that just because they did that, they necessarily by default should just get paid more. It's like it might help you get a job, but then I think we're all have the same thoughts. I think based on the conversations I have with people that, yeah, surely once you get the job, it's then how much value are you adding to that employer is based on how much you get paid. My experience in terms of these conversations is that in the US, there's a bit more sort of like, well, if you've got a master's, particularly in Canada as well with different professions, if you've got a master's degree, you'll earn more. And I've got a master's, but I actually don't agree with that. I think it's how much value are you adding to the business? And that's pretty much all it should boil down to in terms of how much you get paid. So I think the culture around master's degrees is very different. And the pattern I see in America is that seems to be this belief that a master's degree will just solve all problems. That let's say you did an undergrad in industrial design. You can do a degree in industrial design and not be very good at industrial design. That's a fact. Now, if you're willing to accept what I've just said there, are you willing to accept the next thought, which is, well, it's then possible to do a master's degree in industrial design and still not be that good as an industrial designer? There is a bit of flair. There is a bit of talent. There are factors of just have you ever noticed how the people who are great in something, normally, this is just my belief, the people who like know loads about computers and IT and, the sorts of people who pull up settings on a computer that you've just never seen in your life, it's normally just lots of time, just themselves playing around, digging around, exploring these things on their own time. Very rarely are people incredible with computers because of a sort of formal teaching. And even the people who've gone and studied degrees in those things. I studied industrial design at university. Everything I know about Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, SolidWorks, I would argue that was all me pretty much. Been on a few formal courses with like Solid Solutions. But what I know about Photoshop and Illustrator and SolidWorks and Keyshot certainly didn't come from university. And I think most people in this country would agree with that it was kind of their time of playing around, doing different YouTube videos and all the rest of it.
It's the foundation, isn't it? The real kind of learning starts when you're in industry, when you're around people who've been doing it for years and you're absorbing that.
And I think so. If you agree to any extent of what I've just said, then for the cost of a master's degree in industrial design, like let's say you studied industrial design and you were really struggling to get a job and you made 100 applications and got one interview and that was it, you didn't land a job. Doing a master's degree isn't going to solve that problem. Do you know what I mean? So that's where I think there's a little bit of people think it will solve that problem, and my experience is it won't.
I've got to say, I can't ever think of a time where either I've looked at a profile and thought, oh, this guy's got a master's degree, so they're on the list, as compared to someone who's just got a bachelor's. And I don't think it was very rare that I get asked for a master's degree from a client either when I'm taking a briefing, and certainly no one's ever been kind of singled out for master. But then again, that kind of aligns with what you were saying about the British kind of side of things.
So I think a lot of people, and this was my thinking, if I've got a master's, will it help me land a job? No, that's fair game. But if you did a degree and you just had no luck whatsoever in trying to land a job and there was just no traction to as an interest to the quality of your work, a master's degree is quite a price tag that isn't necessarily going to fix that. I think it's valid to also think, well, if I go and do a master's, let's say it's a year and a half, there will be a structured way of doing more projects. So if I'm willing to put in the extra work in terms of time spent to develop these skills and reach out to a wider network and visiting factories and I suppose just having quite a well-rounded view on the development as a designer, that in combination with doing a master's to go through a structured system of doing some projects and receiving some briefs is valid. But I think if you go and do a master's degree, but you just do that, but go and do the absolute bare minimum and don't apply yourself, it ain't going to solve the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about magic then. So,
did you see a show in Vegas?
No, I didn't. No, Penn and Teller had a residency at the hotel I was staying at, but I looked at the ticket prices and I thought, well, one of them doesn't even talk, so I'm not sure where the value is there. But
no, I actually was in the peak of my magic days. Do you remember that show, Penn and Teller Fool Us?
Yeah.
I actually received an email as an invite to go on the European version of that.
You declined? Or what was the story there?
I think they'd done a version that was in like Sweden or Ukraine or something.
Okay.
But it was more, you kind of had to have something very original. So it's interesting magic and it's really creative, in terms of a craft. You can be an incredible magician, but that Penn and Teller Fool Us show was more if you had invented something. And so you could be an incredible magician and having learned from all the sort of historic greats and be super slick, everything's invisible, but not have sort of invented a trick. And that Penn and Teller Fool Us show was more if you'd kind of gone deep enough into inventing your own trick. And it was also more steered towards stage magic, whereas the magic that I did was the close-up magic. So it's, close-up card magic, not for stage.
How did you get into?
So there was a teacher at my school who he was my table tennis coach. So I also played table tennis to quite high level, and he was my table tennis coach. And it was known that he was a very good magician in terms of card magic, but because he was a maths teacher, he also was there's all sorts of like mathematical based tricks and magic as well. Me and a friend said to him, "Look, will you show us some stuff?" Now, we were probably 16 at the time, and he wouldn't tell us anything. And he said, "Look, I'm not telling you anything until you've gone and bought and read this book." Now, the book was about £45, which is quite a lot on a book.
Yeah, when you're 16.
Yeah, and so he said, "I'm not telling you anything until you've read that book and learn everything in it." Now, I didn't buy the book, but my friend was a bit wealthier than me, and he did buy the book. But he kind of sacked it off after about a week or two, and then just said I could have it. I've still got that book to this day. It's called Robert Giobbe's Card College Volume 1. I learned everything in it, and then went back to Jonty and showed him a few things of what I'd learned. And then he showed me a couple of things, and then he told me to buy another book. And so it was he would not just tell you anything. You had to prove your commitment to even just get an ounce of something out of him. And then as time went on, I'd kind of proven I was serious about it, and he shared a bit more. But it was very quickly. So that was probably 16, 17. And I did my first gig when I was either 18 or 19. So it was only about a year and a half later.
Yeah, wow.
And I did my first gig. And I remember the first gig was 60 quid for 2 hours. I was like, this is brilliant, man. If I could just get like a gig a month or something, that'd just be like a good little bit of extra cash for no time at all. And I think in under 12 months from that point, my rates for the next, like for a long time, it was 550 quid for 2 hours, which is pretty, that's at a high level, that's pretty normal. And so it was a bit of a hobby that got a bit out of hand. And yeah, by the time I was 21, my clients like H&M, Marks and Spencer, Beaverbrooks, Estee Lauder, Tesco. I did like the launch of, I remember when the new model of the Ford Focus came out, was hired by Ford to do the launch of the new Ford Focus. And so I kind of had all these clients, and yeah, it kind of took off and did well. But it was a very, I always say that's where I learned sales, because this is sort of all through university doing magic. And at that time, I was getting very deep into learning about sort of sales and marketing and business, and had just always been quite entrepreneurial. And so I was just applying all this stuff that I'd learned from a sales point of view, but magic was kind of the outlet. Now, people assumed, because magic's quite fun and I was making some good money from it, people always assumed that was what I wanted to do. So I think people just thought I was the magic guy. But internally, I'm like, no, I'm just messing around with some cards here. I'm the design guy. I'm not the magic guy. Mm. The design is what I want to do. And so I kind of had to take the decision to just go, I'm just going to wipe that. And so, yeah, I did it for 10 years. That was just kind of on the side. And then I think it was 2015, I just took the decision to just stop entirely. And then the same month is when I launched the design blog.
Oh, cool. So you moved that
on that, because I always thought
transition passions
in Sheffield when I was doing magic. I sort of knew all the sort of managers of the nights and the nightclub promoters and sort of the hospitality boxers at like Sheffield Wednesday and Sheffield United and Sheffield Steelers, and was building like a really good network. But internally, I was like, yeah, I want this, but in design, not with events planners and stuff. So yeah, I just kind of stopped it all. But it was really a good experience, particularly from 19 years old doing magic on the CEO of like some of the largest financial ratings agencies and landing those as clients. And yeah.
But your client presentations now are fun, aren't they? Revealing the prototype to the client, pulling from your sleeve.
Yeah, it's like pretty funny corporate gigs that I was pulled into for. Some of them were trade shows and other presentations and stuff like that.
That's
Yeah,
ace.
it was a good time.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
So this is back in 2011, 2010. I did Magic outside the MGM Grand. So I was in Vegas. This 2010 because ice hockey was my main sport growing up, and I did 3 months coaching hockey in New York. We went to Vegas afterwards, and so I did spend a bit of time like just on the streets of Vegas outside MGM Grand doing a bit of magic.
Oh, nice.
I think I had like a few hours before I had to head to the airport for my flight, so I just kind of threw a hat down and was doing magic outside the MGM Grand.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah, what a crazy place Vegas is. That's awesome. We're rapidly running out of time here, but just wanted to take the last few moments just to talk about what's next. Really, so we've talked about kind of what you've been up to and what you're doing now. But what are you most excited about in the next 12 months?
So there is I suppose specifically at IDC, there is a very large project that we're sort of in the middle of now. So the next 12 months, there is a particular project that's a large focus and has got, like I talked about, that web of inputs earlier. It's like a dream project in terms of everything that it has as part of it. And it's almost touching every function of our team and most members of our team. And yes, some really good projects alongside that, but there's a particular project that's probably won't get launched for about another sort of 4 or 5 years or something. But as for now, I can't really say anything about it. But I think I'm also giving a talk at Develop 3D Live and a few other talks.
Okay.
So yeah, looking forward to those too.
Awesome. When's that then?
End of March, I think.
In March. Okay. Yeah, I did an article for them. So last year. So I'll see if I might see you there. Finally, we mentioned before we click record, we're going to talk about some of the props that you kindly staged just to the right of you there. But rather than go through them all, I wonder if you could tell us about. I wonder if you could tell us about the BAFTA. Is it the BAFTA, the face? Well, I'll tell you what, you talk us about that one, and then you tell us what you won the BAFTA for.
That's what we got. So, yeah, this is actually a device that's used for vascular surgery. So if you rupture your artery and your artery needs stitching back together again, that process is called vascular anastomosis. And so they'll stitch the artery together, and they'll normally put a PTFE graft in there as well. And then they'll apply an adhesive over the top of the stitching to seal it. And then this is a UV light source that's then used to cure that adhesive.
Okay.
So yeah, we went and observed live surgery, observed it being done on a sheep as well in terms of this being. And there's a whole system as part of it to remain sterile because it's a reusable device. And then it slots into a charging unit as well. But the one that you really want here, this is before my time at IDC, but there is a bit of a BAFTA here as well. So IDC used to, I think they've changed the process of how they do it now, but they used to create certain markings or serial numbers on the back of the awards. So for many years, IDC did that, but I think they've changed the process now.
So it isn't something you
so we didn't
worked on. Winning the BAFTA. Okay.
Yeah, we part of the manufacturing process.
But you're part of every BAFTA though, so that's better. Awesome. And there was another award on the shelf as well that you had there.
Oh yeah, that was just a red dot one for another surgical device that's a video laryngoscope that IDC developed.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so there's a lot of, like I said, most of it's medical.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. It's great to see, and I'm sure we could carry on talking for at least another hour in it with the accolades that you and the business have picked up and the publications you've been in. But I think we'll probably call it there because it's been just about an hour, and it makes a nice kind of value-packed kind of episode for people to listen to on their commute or with their coffee or however you consume it. But it's been really great to have you on, and looking forward to maybe bumping into you at the Develop 3D.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Why Design. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave a review wherever you're listening. It really helps others discover the podcast. And while you're at it, why not share it with a friend or colleague who'd enjoy it too? If you'd like to stay connected or explore more about the work we're doing at Kodu, feel free to visit teamkodu.com or connect with me, Chris Whyte, on LinkedIn. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.